Welcome back to your book study, Chapter 3. We're finished Chapter 1, the Yourself chapter, challenging you to see yourself through a 90% lens. Then we carried that same magnifying glass to your family, making sure that you're coming home at the end of the day, putting your hand on the door and seeing your family through a 90% lens. And this book study is about your job. So we're going to pick up that 90% magnifying glass again. One idea, how it applies to you, how it applies to your family. And now let's talk about your job. Now here's what I want to do in this chapter is I'm going to challenge you again. How do you see your job in childcare? Do you see it through a 90% lens? And that 90% job lens is the what is good, what can I control, what do I like about my job? What am I grateful for? What am I blessed to have? What do I feel privileged to be able to do in this job? Rather than seeing your job through a 10% lens, which is the lens of complaining, talking about things we can't control, looking at the parts of the job that you do not like. And don't get me wrong, we talked about 3 times complain at the beginning in the Yourself chapter. So I do think complaining is very important. It's very important that you create a structure where people are, if you're in a leadership position, people are able to complain. But I don't want that going on more than 3 times in a row without having what I call a solution meeting. Well, let's talk about the 90%. So how do we do that? We're going to train our brain in the Yourself module to learn how to see what's good about ourselves. We're starting to not worry as much about our 10% that our families bring to us, and we're choosing to come home and be more loving to our family. But we can also make the choice. You know, the same doorknob theory we talked about last book study, where we're going to put our hand in the door and come in the door to our families and see them through a 90% lens. I think we should do the same thing at work. We should put our hand in the door, and before we come in the door to our job in childcare, I think we should take a minute to think about who's coming through that door. My girlfriend said, you should write a book called Dealing with the Doorknobs at Work and the Doorknobs at Home. That sounds like a great book title. But the ability to put our hand on the door at work and say, who's coming in this door? Is it somebody who is grateful for their job, somebody who loves the kids, loves the opportunity to make a profound difference in their community? Then go childcare from that place. So how do we learn to do that? So of course we have 90%, but I've always been so intrigued by what separates people who are happy at work and unhappy at work. I've been speaking and training for 30 years, as I said, and it's very unique to me how people come into the training room, and most, especially childcare, you're like the nicest people on earth. Most people will come into a training room, and I've been to many of your conferences and training in many of your childcare facilities, and honestly, in your centers and early learning centers. Honestly, 90% of you, 99% of you are quite amazing. Sometimes people show up, though, don't really want to be there. And that's unique to me. Because I believe the story that you tell at your dinner table in the morning at breakfast, I think the story that you tell about going to the book study, about going to work, about having to come to training is exactly where your magnifying glass is focused. Because training, I know we're busy and it means you have to close down the centers and you know it's a whole thing, but it's also something that most companies don't do. And if you've ever worked somewhere else where they never offered any training or book studies of any kind, you know, it's kind of a bonus to work for somebody who cares enough about you to bother bringing in a speaker, getting a lunch, etc. But people I've never met will actually come into these training rooms in every imaginable industry, not just childcare. Some are happy to be there, most, and some are not. This is very intriguing to me because how you show up is the impression you leave in the world. So how you show up also tells me how you see your job, because if you were grateful to be at the training, chances are you also have a grateful behavior about your work. So where does that come from? I've spent many years dissecting why someone in childcare who's been there for 20 years loves what they do, loves their coworkers, loves the families, loves the kiddos, is now caring for the families that they cared for before as kids. Like there's people in childcare that just beam and love what they do. And then there's sometimes people who don't love it as much. So what separates them? Because some can be there the same amount of time, have just as many kiddos in their care, but yet some are happy, some are not. So in this chapter, talking about your job, I explain the research I've done to understand that I believe the same dinner table that you were raised at as a child that taught you how to take care of yourself, the person in the mirror, I believe that family also taught you work ethic, also taught you about the belief systems, that going to work happy is actually normal behavior. And if you were blessed, honored, and privileged to grow up with happy parents, parent or guardian who actually liked their job, then I believe consciously or subconsciously, you learned a belief system at your dinner table while you were eating dinner at night and your parents or parent or guardian shared their workday at the end of the day. If you were blessed to be raised by people who enjoyed their job, I believe you consciously or subconsciously overheard that dinner table conversation and developed this belief system that where you work should make you happy, that it is normal behavior. It's amazing to me how often I speak in childcare and I ask my audiences, were any of your parents in childcare growing up? And how often people will put up their hand. That's an indication to me that you sat at a table with somebody who liked what they did, so you wanted to go do something that you liked too. However, if you grew up with half-empty, depleted people who didn't enjoy their job, and some of them might have even blamed you for having to have that job that they didn't even like because they had to put dinner on the table for you, then I think we get a skewed view of what work should represent to us in our life. That isn't a place that you go that is fulfilling and makes you happy. It's a place you go that is simply a means to an end. And maybe you ate your little dinner as a child and your parents or parent talked about what they didn't like about their job all day. And you consciously or subconsciously as a child, you know better than anybody in the 0 to 7 imprint years, you overheard these conversations at your dinner table and you thought, oh, where you work doesn't make you happy. Again, it's a means to an end. Maybe your parents blamed the union. Maybe they blamed management for their job. And how could we possibly grow up believing that our jobs are an extension of our beautiful life, not the place we go punch in, punch out, and wait for Friday? So how do you view your job? Do you see it through this 90% lens, a positive lens? Do you talk about your job in a positive way? Do you think about your job in a positive way? Because whatever you focus on ripples out. Because if you only see what you don't like, because of course you have parts of your job you don't like, but if that's all you see, it starts to affect you and you wonder, am I making a difference in these children's lives? And then that ripples out to your coworkers, because don't you work with people you just want to say, why don't you go home? Because there's people who go to work unhappy, that don't enjoy their job, and the ripple affects them. It affects you when you work with them. It affects who you serve. It affects the kiddos and their families because they know whether or not your heart truly is in childcare. And then that ripples home. Because if you don't like what you do, you go home at the end of the day and you complain to your family about the thing that you do. And then you teach all the people that are eating with you that where you work won't make you happy. It's simply a means to an end. And I personally have spoke to every imaginable industry, and I can tell you, is there a job more important than childcare? I'm not sure. I don't think so. Is that how you see it? Are you grateful, blessed, honored, and privileged to serve? I hope so, because you have such an important job. See you next book study. See you next one.